Bahia, welcome to Podcastina.
Yay. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Thanks for coming here. So, can you please share a little bit about what got you into internal family systems work?
Yeah. Well, do you want the long story or the short story?
Whatever your most true to heart rendition is.
Yeah. Well, okay. Um, there's a medium story, so we'll go with that. So I found this work when I was living in Los Angeles. I think that's where you are, right? That's right.
Yes.
And I I feel like that town for me was kind of like, there's Hollywood that draws us kind of the people who are creative in, and then for me, it really helped me hit my bottom really fast. And I don't know if that's a common story in LA, but I had big dreams and wanted a lot out of life. But I also have a family legacy of alcoholism in my family, and I liked to party and do all sorts of things. And I ended up in LA getting sober at 25. And that was kind of the beginning of like a whole new life and world for me. There's an incredible recovery community in Los Angeles. And, when you stop drinking or using or chasing after boys or whatever the behavior is, you get faced with what's really going on inside of yourself. And so as I got sober, I started to get faced with what was going on inside of me. And I heard about this internal family systems healing modality. And I was like, what is this? This sounds like the thing that's going to help me. And I just kind of followed that breadcrumb trail to do my own work and then to get trained in that work and hold space for other people. So I'll share more about it.
So, for someone that has never heard of internal family systems, can you just give a definition, a working definition of what that means, what it refers to?
Yeah. So IFS or internal family systems is a healing modality that is often used by therapists or coaches. And a lot of people think that we're talking about working with your family when you're doing internal family systems, like your parents, your siblings, but it's not that at all. It's actually about working with your internal family. And what I mean when I say that is this work is also known as parts work. So the model believes that we all have these different parts of ourselves that all have different roles and different functions. And in addition to those parts, we have this thing inside of us called self energy, which is kind of our true essence, um, our maybe our connection to something greater than ourselves, if you believe in that, or seat of consciousness, our innate sense of curiosity and compassion and calm and connectedness. There's a few more C's. They have these like 8 C's that they use to define it. And then the third part of the model that I like to describe is that all of these parts are connected to each other. It works as a system with the self energy. And so the goal kind of this IFS work is to help any parts of the system that have taken on an extreme function kind of come back into balance and harmony inside of a person.
Perfect. So, then can you name what those different parts are?
Yeah. Yeah. And so the parts kind of are organized by the different jobs that they have. So the there's three different categories. There's the exiles, the protectors, and the firefighters. And the exile parts are the oldest parts of the system most of the time. They're young, they're kind of the ones that hold our innocence, but they also hold burdens and beliefs from our childhood, maybe something like, oh, I feel unlovable or unworthy, or parts that might have experienced, trauma. Those parts are inside of us, right? They're still in there. Some people like to think of this work kind of along the lines of inner child work, but there's actually potentially like a lot of inner children inside of that inner family. Um, so those are the exile parts. And then in response to the pain or whatever those exiles are carrying are the protectors. And the protector's job is to help. the exiles not feel what they're feeling. And so, what that could look like inside is maybe if there's an exile that feels insecure, there's a protector who's like, I'm going to go and work really hard in my career and, make sure that we never feel that insecurity because I can find security in my work or, whatever that looks like. And so the protectors, there's all sorts of different kinds of protectors, even parts that are, people pleasers or yeah, there's lots of different kinds. And then there are the firefighters, and the firefighter parts are kind of like self-soothers. They look for ways to kind of put out, again, that emotional pain of the exiles, whether that's through more extreme and dangerous behaviors like, addiction or extreme codependency or even like dissociation can be one. And they're really just trying to help keep the system in balance, right? Our system is constantly trying to stay in homeostasis, but you know, we're trying to help the extreme parts have a little bit less extreme ways of manifesting. Um, and I will say that, one more piece here is that all of these parts have a positive intention for the person, right?
That's so important to know.
Yeah, it is because it can be really easy. And I think a lot of people find this work and come to it because they realize that there's an inner dissonance, that there is some part of themselves that they really don't like or don't want to face. And this work is very much about like radical self-compassion, really listening and understanding to get to know like how is this part trying to help me actually? And can we update it so that it can do that in a better way?
Okay, that's great. So that means in this context, when we say family and we use the family system, it just means these three parts can't be shut down. You can't put one in a room and let the other two drive the ship. Or correct me if I'm wrong, like all of them just always have to be, are they operating at like 33, 33, 33? Or do we get into states where, let's say, the protector takes over, the exile takes over?
Yeah. That's an interesting question. I've never kind of heard it asked like that before. I don't think it's as cut and dry ever as 33, 33, 33. But I do think that what you're saying, certain parts do kind of take over. And I like to use the example of like driving the bus, right?
Mhm.
Like if an exile gets activated, maybe the protector, like the perfectionism protector will hop in the driver's seat and really just drive the bus until burnout even, right? And that's kind of an extreme example, but that happens. And then maybe the firefighter comes in to soothe the burnout with, binging, you know, Bridgerton for whatever, a month. And then you're like, where'd that month of my life go? Oh, right. So the parts, the goal too, right, is to become so aware of these parts of us that we know when this is happening, that we know when these parts are taking over the system, and that we can help them, give them what they need, do that inner work inside of ourselves. At first, it's kind of slow, but the more we build relationship, I can see when my parts are getting activated and kind of give them what they need pretty quick so that we can come to this ideal of being self-led, which is kind of like leading our life from that innate curiosity and compassion and creativity and letting the parts, be there because we want them to do the jobs that they do. Like we all have like a taskmaster, or most of us do, depending who knows how organized your taskmaster is. But you know, they have important roles in the system and we don't want to get rid of the parts. We just want to help them, you know, find a way to express themselves that feels good.
Okay, I'm glad you pointed that out. That's a very helpful way of looking at it because I was drawing this kind of similarity to, I don't know if you're familiar with Michelle Chalfant and the Adult Chair.
Mm-mm, no.
So it's a therapy podcast, and it just reminds me of this because it's also three parts. And it kind of sounds like she talks about when we're very triggered and we're really in our wounding, and maybe I can draw a parallel to the exile mode in
Mhm.
this, where she talks about us being in our child chair.
Yeah.
And then maybe the more firefighter kind of impulsive, let me self soothe, let me have a drink tonight, let me go to bed early, binge TV, whatever, is the adolescent chair. And
Mm,
then maybe the protector is the adult chair where you're fully conscious and you're really giving space to whatever's bothering you inside. But I think with that model, there's a little bit more pathologizing going on with the child chair and the adolescent chair where you don't want to necessarily be in those. And once you recognize that you are, you're kind of trying to backtrack and get into adult chair mode versus what I'm hearing about the IFS systems is that maybe you do want to nurture the exile parts or the firefighter parts. Is that fair to say?
absolutely. Yeah, that's really interesting that the chair models. But yeah, we do. We want to build relationship with them. We want every single part of ourselves to really know and understand that, you know, we can get to know them. We can understand why they came to be. Like, what were the formative moments that created their behavior? And really, when we give these parts some appreciation and understanding, like it is incredible what happens, the transformation that can happen, the relaxing of the parts, right? Because usually the parts that are working so hard or carrying, a belief about themselves are really struggling and not enjoying the ride. And so if there's ever a part inside of us that's like, we need to get rid of these parts, then we're going to work with the part that wants to get rid of the other parts first. We
Sure.
don't bypass that. Yeah.
How
Yeah.
does this modality differ from, let's say, just traditional talk therapy?
Yeah. Well, I am not a licensed therapist, right? I'm an IFS practitioner. So that just means that my training is specifically in this modality. I'm also a certified conscious partnership coach. But so I don't have all of the training that other therapists do have. And so I can't speak specifically to any of those models, but I do think that there are parts of therapy that are, more focused on pathology or around having a diagnosis. And I think that diagnoses can be helpful for certain people at certain points in their journey and getting information that they need. But this approach is very much client led, right? Like we ask the person sitting, who's coming in for a session, like, where do we start here? What do you want to be with? What are you noticing? Um, and we let them kind of guide the journey. And it's not about labeling any part as anything, but really just building those relationships inside. And I'll have to give a shout out to the creator and the person who synthesized the system, Dr. Richard Schwartz, um, for all of his work. And I love the way that he describes it as attachment theory taken inside, right? So,
Ooh.
yeah, right. I know.
The
Attachment theory.
visual of that is just really makes it so digestible. That's why I just like had a somatic response to you saying it like that.
I love that. Yeah, so attachment theory taken inside, right? Like there might be parts of us that we're avoidant towards, or parts of us that make us feel anxious. And so, really doing the work to create those secure attachments between ourselves and our parts in my life, and in many of the people I work with, has just been so transformative. Yeah.
Ah, terrific. Okay,
Yeah.
so can you, without obviously giving away too many details, give me an example of how you've helped someone that's come in with some sort of problem and you've implemented IFS to help them?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, two different things come to mind. One is that I do a lot of work in the domain of relationships. Relationships is kind of what brought me to my bottom back in LA. And, when people are having, a fight, a breakdown, oftentimes like, we have parts of us that want to blame our partner, who want to criticize our partner, who want to, those are the protectors and the firefighters, the defense that comes up. And when I work with people, right, we do a lot of slowing down and really coming into contact with your own parts, right? So when the trigger happens, really like slowing down to trace back, what just happened there? What happened inside of me? What are the parts that got activated? And then how can I be with those parts before I go back and make repair or whatnot? And so I've had a lot of success with clients like learning how to pause in a breakdown, which is like almost one of the hardest skills because your nervous system is all activated in relationship breakdowns, and really learning how to pause and then get curious and reflective and become your own parts detector, right? Really being able to know, like, am I blended? Who's in the driver's seat right now? Is it a part of me that's just so angry or frustrated or sad? Um, and then the other thing that's coming to mind is I have a client who we've done a lot of work around social anxiety with. He came in and just really was struggling with interpersonal relationships and not wanting to be around other people. And the more that he could get curious about that part of him and not reject it and hate it and wish it would go away, the more capacity he had to be with it. And he got to experiment with like taking that part out into the world with him. Like, really, it was there. And so was he. His self energy was there and that part. And so over time, building that relationship um, has been incredible, right? And, now he has different social experiences, different community that he's building within his own life. And so it's just such a beautiful example of how the inner work really affects how we traffic through the world.
How does IFS help navigate romantic relationships and can it help break patterns of codependency?
Yeah, yeah. So more on that. Um, as far as codependency goes, a big part of the work is about differentiation, right? And codependency is like, okay, we're all kind of enmeshed. Like, I'm in your space, you're in my space. Like, I need you to do this so I feel okay. I need you to do this so I feel okay. And it's really about, you know, the couple being able to differentiate within themselves first to really realize, like, oh, okay, this is a part of me that really wants them to change so that I can be okay. And once we can start to kind of like see what's happening inside of ourselves and then kind of realize that our partner has their own parts, right? That it might not be as personal as you think, that your partner, you know, is having their own reactions and responses based on their own development, childhood parts, then we can really kind of slow these things down. It doesn't become as personal, right? It's not quite as attacking as
That's
it
the
may.
hardest thing to overcome is the taking things personally.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And, you know, if you were a client or someone I'd be working with, I would get really curious about like what happens when it feels so personal, right? Because there might be a part there um, for you, for a lot of people, right? That really it feels so personal. And as we kind of trace those parts back and get to know them better, we might discover where that comes from. And that knowledge about where this comes from is something that's really valuable to know about ourselves as we start to build long-term partnership, because long-term partnership is such an intense mirror for all of the unhealed parts within ourselves.
Oh, yeah. Say
The
that 20 more times.
It's the ultimate long-term, committed partnership, because you can't really go to those places when you're just like having fun, like when you're just, but if you're really in it to like do life together, your partner will bring up, guaranteed, all the parts of you that aren't healed yet, because your parts want your partner to fulfill those unmet needs of your exiles, right? You really want that person to be responsible for making you feel loved, for making you feel valuable, for making you feel, like you don't have to feel guilty or whatever the thing is. I'm kind of outing myself, right? These are some of my parts, and a lot of other people's as well. But the point of all this work, right, is that we become the caretakers of our own parts first and don't put that on our partners. And that's, I think, where a lot of people get hung up, is that they really want the other person to fill that void for them. And I've found, and I watch happen with clients, that when we can do the internal work of really like nurturing and building relationship with those parts inside of ourselves that have those unmet needs. And it sounds weird to like give it to yourself, right? To give
Mhm.
that attention to yourself. But it really does create more space for the other person to show up in that way. And then they kind of just do. It's like magic. And I have a part, right, that really like, and I think a lot of people have this part that really just want the other person to meet their relational need. And some of that is valid, right? This is a relationship. And so it's a fine line. And we do the dance of like, how much of this is mine to really take care of? And, you know, what is a healthy amount for my partner to meet me in that need or desire I have?
So, in internal family systems, then, how do you work with a trigger? It comes up, you've done the work with IFS. What's your tool belt of I feel triggered, now what?
Yeah. Well, you have to know that you're triggered first, right? And um that's a skill set in itself. That is like a part on the continuum of awareness where if we're able to say, okay, I'm triggered, like my nervous system, I am dysregulated, whether it's fight or flight or freeze. And then comes, taking that pause, taking a break, and really, really embodying what it is to be a caretaker of our own system. And so, one of the kind of techniques and tools that I love so much, I have a meditation that you are happy to share with your listeners if they're interested in this work, is about unblending from the parts, right? This is
Hmm.
that differentiation I was talking about. It's really where, you are like, okay, I am activated right now. This is what it feels like in my body. You really get curious and slow down. Like, what is that part saying about my partner or about myself? Maybe they're so bad, or maybe like, oh, I'm so bad. This is all my fault. Like, really understanding, like, what is the flavor? What is the essence of this part? And then asking that part to give you a little bit of space, right? So I offer this like in a meditation, but people work with their parts in different ways. For some people, they might want to like draw their part, right, to externalize it. Some people, it works to just kind of ask for space inside. And I find that when you can get that space inside and you have, your breath starts to regulate, like there's just, I don't know, I think they call it affect regulation that happens. And your emotions just kind of settle a little bit so that you can really just stay curious with how this part is trying to help you in those moments. And, when I work with people, there is like more of a process really to like trace this back and really understand like what is the protector that's here, because usually the protectors are the ones that are being defensive, being critical, or running away from the situation, and then really identifying like who is the exile that is lingering underneath that, right? Because those are the parts, they all need our help, and we don't like rush to find the exile. But when we can really, when the time is right and we can get to the exile and be with it and offer it some of what it needs, there's a process called unburdening, which is where you invite these parts to like let go of some of the old beliefs or the somatic pain or mental pain or whatever the memories that they're carrying. And then we invite in like the qualities, their innate, original, aspirational qualities of like what are they, whatever they want to invite in. And so there's this healing kind of ritual that we can do. And it just really affects the way that we show back up again and again um, in a relationship. Because really, and I'll just say this, I think that all of this work is a process of maturation, right? Of really just becoming more responsible and more kind and connected to ourselves. And I think the more we're connected to ourselves, the easier it is to come back into connection in relationship, because the nature, I believe, of relationship is disconnection and reconnection and rupture and repair again and again.
So that sounds similar. Correct me if I'm wrong. That would be the way that you would implement this work with overcoming trauma. do you look for the exile, the cause of the trauma? Do you nurture where that's coming from?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like trauma.
Big T trauma,
Big,
little T
big,
trauma.
big T, little T trauma, you know, all of these moments. I almost am like, it is a helpful word. Um, and it's just so many moments, right? All these little T moments are, you know, harmful too, especially if they've been repetitive throughout our life. And so, yeah, that is how we would work with those moments. And it's a really like slow, respectful process. All of this work has so much consent. There's never like, let's skip to the exile and do an unburdening. It's like, maybe that would take, 3 or 4 sessions to really get enough internal consent and permission and the right day at the right time where the protectors are like willing to allow that work to happen because they really are those protective parts, you know. Sometimes for some of us really don't want to go to those more tender places. And it makes sense, you
I
know.
appreciate the visual of that because not being, I don't know, I've just never really thought about how we're being intrusive on ourselves when we're doing some of this work, and that some of it might be like self boundaries with your own thing. I don't know. I just haven't thought about that before, so it's kind of breaking my brain a little bit in a good way.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, and right that there might be a question of like, do we have parts of us that are really motivated to heal? Like I know those parts. I've
Mhm.
had those parts that are like, I'm gonna heal all my shit. I'm gonna do it as fast as I can, right? And those parts can be harmful, right? They can, sometimes slower is faster, right?
Oh, slower
And
is faster.
I,
That's incredible.
yeah, I feel like that's kind of a catchphrase in the IFS world, like slower is faster, just really trusting that there's no need to rush or push or force or any of that.
Okay, so talk to me about, I think we touched on it very lightly, the inner critic and how that's related to this work.
Yeah. So, what do I want to say about that? Um, just like all of our parts, right? There's a positive intention. And, people experience, I don't know, get curious, whoever you are who's listening to this, like how do you experience your inner critic, right? Does it sound like a voice beating you up? Does it sound like, oh, just comparison, just like looking at other people and then that overwhelming sense of, you know, depression that results from that? Does it look like, I don't know, whatever else someone's inner critic might look like? But oftentimes I think that our critics, oh, I just heard this recently. It was so good. That our critics are trying to help us become the ideal version of ourselves, right? And so they have a strategy to help us become that vision of who we want to be or who we think we can be. And, maybe it works to beat you up, to get your taxes done. Maybe it works to, you know, to really just like look at what other people are doing on social media to like motivate you to get your stuff together. Um, but there's an impact that comes with that, right? That we don't feel good about ourselves. We don't like the way that we're talking to ourselves. We might feel shame, you know. Uh, I'm sure there's a lot of other things. Um, and I think that underneath the inner critic, right? And sometimes it can be really hard to get underneath someone's inner critic. But when we can slow down and identify it as an inner critic and really just start to get curious. And this is kind of like the secret sauce of this whole thing is to really just extend curiosity to these parts of us, right? And we have parts that hate the inner critic, right? Maybe,
Yes.
right? Someone might have a part that hates it, that wants it to go away, just make it shut up, right? When we can ask those parts to give us a little bit of space so we can just get curious about the inner critic and we really get to know it and we get to know how long has it been doing this job, where did it learn to do this job, a lot of information there, and does this inner critic know that you have self energy here too, right? A lot of the time, like dissonance and like polarization, they call it inside the system, where you have parts fighting with each other, happen because the parts don't even know that there is like this self energy within us and they don't trust it,
Hmm.
right? And so, can an inner critic like meet the self or come to trust it? I mean, that's a pretty powerful journey. And also, there's probably someone like a younger part underneath someone's inner critic, whether it's fear of failure or fear of not loss of connection. Um, if I don't beat myself up, then, my mother won't love me anymore. I don't know. Like, who knows? Some of this stuff is just seems like so irrational, but based on our own histories, it always makes sense. So, a lot of what happens with the more difficult parts, like this inner critic conversation, is like a negotiation about inviting the parts that there might be a different way to do the same job that they're doing now. Like, there might be a way to motivate me to get something done without beating myself up, right? Um, and helping them learn to trust that, that self energy, that part of us that does want to just like live well, has motivation and has inspiration. Um, and that some of our other parts can help, right? Like that other managers and task masters, to-do list managers, all of them can help get things done too. So yeah, does that kind of answer what you're
It
asking? Or
does, and it makes me think because I feel like the inner critic, there's a lot of overlap between the inner critic and imposter syndrome. And so
mm,
it kind of begs the question, does the inner critic, does the imposter syndrome, they have good intentions, you're saying?
hmm yeah. I mean, I know imposter syndrome so well inside of myself, right? Um, I definitely have, struggled with that for a while. It's hard to put yourself out there in ways. I mean, especially for people in Los Angeles, right? Who are like, you know, out putting themselves out there so courageously all the time, and anyone in the creative field. Um, but yeah, I mean, even imposter syndrome is trying to help in some way. And, if you listen to the parts, right? And I'm just like, should I slow down and see if my imposter syndrome parts are here? What would they say? Yeah. And so if I slow down and kind of listen to like an old kind of, if I take a record, an old record and put it on the record player from my imposter syndrome parts, they say like, you're not ready. Right? And what are they scared of if I wasn't ready yet? They're like, you don't want to put yourself out there yet if you're not ready. Right? And so that may or may not be true. Right? That may or may not be true. And we're never ready. I'll just
Right.
say that. Right? We're never ready for anything that happens, whether it's becoming a mother or, being cast in a project or starting a new job or, getting into a long-term partnership. Like we're not, you grow into these things as you go. But that part is just trying to help me, like really, it wants to be so prepared. It wants to be over prepared. It wants to feel like I already, have that confidence. And the truth is, we build confidence as we go, right? But when that part has been up for me, like I really couldn't hear that. I didn't have access to that understanding and those beliefs. And yeah, so even imposter syndrome is trying to protect me from humiliation. It's trying to protect me from, being too naive and just like going for things before they're fully cooked. And so, now I can go back and say thank you to that. And I've definitely sat with those parts, and I encourage other people to really just like listen, like, how is this part trying to help me? And, if we can get a little bit of space from it, that little bit of unblending, like how can we become our own kind of internal coach? Like, and not from a place of like, okay, let's go, coach, coach, but like find that wisdom within. Or, right, as much as this model is about like kind of having this internal experience of integration, sometimes we need other people who are further along, who we trust, who have compassion and presence for us to kind of help update our parts that, you know, that you will grow as you go, that it's okay to be not fully cooked yet, to whatever the thing is that we need to hear. So I don't want to leave people because I think a lot of people do have this idea that, like, oh, okay, so I should just become completely independent and like work with my own parts and like have this self relationship with my own inner family. Like, we also need other people to help us. Kind of like tuning forks, right? The people that feel good to be around. I think it's because like our parts just can kind of and our self can kind of link up with that frequency and get a little update about what it feels to be harmonious and expressed and all of that.
Yeah, you can't do that type of work in a vacuum.
I don't think so.
It's remarkable because I've always kind of said, I don't know, my own healing journey started with like working for this guided meditation studio and getting really involved with meditating and learning that to then finding and linking up with a therapist that I really trusted and I also am in a 12-step program as well, so I'm the person that does everything to
Yes,
try
of
to
course.
bring it all together. I have been accused by my therapist of sometimes using tools to be a little bit too harsh on myself because
Mhm.
she's like, "Oh, you're always going out and finding and learning some new tool and then kind of just almost taking over accountability, so to speak, to try to fix it." But then I can draw a parallel between being a comedian and what we were just talking about, where you can't practice comedy in a vacuum. You have to have an
Right.
audience. You have to get feedback to understand whether or not what you're working on is actually working. And so it sounds similar to this, where you have to test if what you're doing with IFS and with any healing modality is working. And the way that you test it is by being out in the world and being in relation with others.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. That's so much to really have an embodied experience of our growth and the change. Like, yeah, we get to like keep walking into the fire as gently as we want to, right? Whether that's just with one friend or group experiences or being in a relationship or taking a new job at work, whatever the thing is. Um, that all of these are invitations. I heard someone say, and you might have heard this, I feel like very behind the curve. I have a 3-year-old, so I like don't I'm not as hip as I used to be. I feel like I'm in like a different era now. But somebody said AFGO. Have you heard of this before?
No.
Another fucking growth opportunity.
Oh, I love that.
So like, right? Like all of these moments that are can be so triggering. It's like another fucking growth opportunity. Like what are the parts of me that get activated when I go on stage, when no one laughs, when, my mother comes to visit and, oh, those parts are still there, right? Oh, they still need my attention. They still need my help. Um, yeah. Yeah. So,
Family can be so triggering. My favorite quote about it is your family knows how to press your buttons because they're the ones that installed them.
yeah, I've heard that one. Yep.
So
Yeah,
it's
that's
so
right.
crazy. It's just so crazy. This next question, a little bit of a left turn, but I have curiosity around this.
Let's
So,
go.
all right. How do you think societal expectations of women lead into doing the IFS system and working on it?
Hmm. Hmm. Well, in IFS, there's kind of an area that is known as the legacy burdens, which are kind of these like cultural burdens that we carry as a society. And let's see if I can kind of get the main ones. I think it's like racism, individualism, materialism, and then I think patriarchy. And, you know, I'm sure every woman is going to have their own experience of what it's like to be a woman in the world. I'll speak from my own, right? The cultural expectations of what I should look like, how I should think, how outspoken I should be, right? And as we grow up, plus a bunch more, as especially as a mother, now that I'm a mother, right? Like there's all sorts of other expectations. But I think as we grow up and evolve in an environment that carries all of these ideas and media and expectations and just behaviors that are passed down generationally about being a woman, that of course we take that in and internalize that in some way. I mean, unless you grew up with like, a mom in the 60s who was like completely like a hippie protester, like already, just um, liberating herself from all of this stuff. But it is um, a journey to really identify the ways that we've been impacted and to really question it. Like, is this the truth of who I am? Is this, it comes from the culture. Am I okay with this? Do I like this? And can I give myself permission? Like, I think it can be scary sometimes to give ourselves permission to break out of a cultural mode and then be out in the world. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people experience that who are not in the, you know, normal mainstream way of life, right? Especially, I don't want to, yeah, yeah, there's so many different ways I could talk about that. But I mean, I'm curious for you, was there like something specific that you were thinking about as a woman that you were getting curious about how these parts work?
Sure. Yeah, because I think just being in a profession where I am out in the public eye, as I age, I find myself having concerns about things that then I judge myself for having those concerns. Or like, I don't want to be this person that's like, oh, when can I get my next Botox appointment? And I also don't want to have judgment around it because people can do whatever they want. But as far as judging myself for being concerned with things like that, I have to look inside and be like, okay, where is this really coming from? Do I really care about this? Does society really care about this? And that's tricking me into thinking that it's my problem and my burden. And so that's kind of where I wonder about that. And because I don't know, I want to create more understanding. That's kind of my goal with this show is like, oh, a show for women and people who like women. So what's a good way for not only us to have the recognition of what's going on inside of us that might be societal pressure, but for anyone else that doesn't identify as a woman to also understand where we're coming from and have some more compassion for what we deal with. That's just a framework of the society that we live in.
Oh, well, I mean, I think you really just nailed it, right? Like, really, like, I love this Botox example. I mean, I think really questioning like, where is this coming from? And recognizing the judgment of like, oh, I'm judging myself for having that thought in the first place. And I don't want to judge other people. And I don't want to judge myself. Wait, hold on. Where is
Yeah,
this
it's
coming from?
exhausting.
What do I value? Yeah. And then really like, and I mean, value work, I feel like it's just like a whole other conversation, but really just can anchor us into what matters to me in this life. And if like feeling youthful and like glowy and young like is a value you have, and that's how you want to embody it, because there are so many different ways we can embody like those youthful parts of ourselves. Maybe it's Botox, maybe it's just like in our energy or the way we dress or, doing fun things that feel youthful. I don't know. But, you know, we get to be creative within ourselves and work to decide like what is my self-led expression of my femininity. And I've definitely been exploring, you know, I had for a long time some parts of me that like really felt some aversion to the word goddess. I was like, oh,
Mhm.
people and goddess energy and oh, like whatever. Right. But lately I've just kind of been like really getting curious about like, okay, if I am a goddess, like how do I want, like, what would I want to feel like? And really just that exploration and the curiosity and the permission to, be creative in my expression, I think is a good start.
How do we improve our relationship with that inner critic? Going back to how it has good intentions, how do we convince ourselves it has good intentions and be a little less freaked out by it?
Yeah. So it sounds like maybe there is another part that really doesn't believe that it has good intentions. Right. And so this is kind of where like we get into like a little parts party, right? So there is the inner critic. Maybe there's a part that's like, that needs some convincing that this one has good intentions. And we might need to just like ask the skeptical ones to give a little space, right? So that we can just like listen and just like try it on and see if the inner critic has a good intention. And, I don't know if that's something. Some people are really have a lot of access to these parts when they're by themselves, and some people really just need a space holder, someone to guide the process. I was in, pretty thorough, deep IFS therapy myself for like 2 years before I even like ventured the idea of holding space in this way, and I found that really beneficial. And I still work with somebody today who holds space for me with IFS because having someone else's self energy there, like holding the session, just gives you so much more access to these parts. And so and some people do have access. So if you can slow down enough to really like extend curiosity, to really unblend, like get some space. And you could even do this with a journal, right? You could say like, okay, um, like let's just channel through my hand like that critical part of me, right? And see what it has to say. And you would just ask like, how are you trying to help me? And see what comes out. I'm sure for every person it's a different answer. I'm sure there's patterns, right? There's some things that are the same. But really just I think identifying the critical part is the first step, really being like, oh, there's that voice again. Um, and then staying curious, like, how are you trying to help me? Oh, you don't want me to be humiliated. Like, there's probably an experience, and like I know this one within myself. I'm having flashbacks right now of like the session where some humiliation really caught up with me. I was in an acting class in Los Angeles before I bottomed out. That was like one of those tear you down, build you up, like really like not a healthy space to be in. And that's, you know, my AFGO, another fucking growth opportunity that I had then, right? And I don't regret it, but there were a lot of moments of humiliation and it was not a kind space. And so it makes sense that my inner critic, you know, was not interested in me having to go through that experience again, right? Most of the time, these parts are really trying to protect us from shame or like whatever the pain is that's underneath. And, you know, so I don't know what it is for anyone else, right? I would say just stay curious, become aware, get curious, and then like, the cherry on the top is just to have compassion. It's like radical self-compassion. Like, I see you. Thank you. I love you. I'm sorry. Like, and can we try a different way? Like, there's then a negotiation that happens once we kind of get to the root of what's going on. Like, if there was a different way that we could, you know, handle moments that feel like humiliation or like, whatever the negotiation is, um, then that can be really helpful.
So, someone's listened to this conversation. They're
Yeah.
ready to try and implement IFS. Where do they start?
Yeah. Well, I see clients myself for individuals and couples, and there is a whole directory of practitioners and therapists on the IFS website, which is an excellent resource. Um, and I think that that is the best way to really root yourself in this healing paradigm is to really just, jump in there. A lot of the therapists take insurance, coaches, not so much, but like have different angles in presenting this work. And there are some meditations on the Insight Timer if you want to start exploring your parts that way. Dick Schwartz, who is the creator of IFS, has some meditations there, and so do other people, including myself. And I think that's the place. And I'll say this, like the first step really is becoming your own parts detector. So really just like noticing like, oh, I think there's a part of me that's right. Like that part of me before I walk into a party that gets that little bit of like social anxiety, like, okay, that's a part of me. And, you know, the part of me that wants to stay up and watch another episode of Love is Blind at 11 o'clock. Like she just wants to have fun.
I
Like,
mean, don't air out my plans for tonight.
and then the part of me that's like, no, 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 you have so much work to do, right? That's another part of me. And so, another thing that I like to do is make maps of all of these parts. Like when I'm feeling overwhelmed, that is usually my first signal that I have a lot of parts that are active at one time, and I need to map them all out and figure out what they all need and slow it down. So there's some ideas.
Incredible. Bahia Miller, where can people find more about what you're doing?
Yay. They can go to my website, which is bahiamiller.com, Bahia, like Bahia, the Bay. Bahiamiller.com. And then I have an Instagram account at sacredsupport.ifs. And if you go on my website, down at the bottom of the homepage, there is an unblending meditation, the one that I spoke about before. So if you are thinking that you're in a part or feeling reactive in your relationship or something like that, it's there to help you kind of slow down and experience that differentiation and start building relationship with your parts.
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming on the show to talk to me today.
Oh, thank you so much, Galina.
Of course. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Bye.